And it's because the whole body politics in the United States, it's already moved beyond that point. So people asked me before Biden became president, would relationship get better if Biden were to win? And within me, I said to myself, this gentleman or this lady doesn't know a hill of beans about what's really happening in the society in America. It's beyond party politics. And so that's why, Susan, you're absolutely right. It's a perfect storm when you have a asymptomatic virus at the same time when the United States falls into a Thucydides trap. And so I don't see, frankly, a better relationship even in dealing with the pandemics. And I think that this is really a human tragedy of the 21st century. And if the United States were to back off in this one area only, that is dealing with the pandemics, and begin to cooperate, I think it will be a lot better. But I'm not hopeful of it. That's why, frankly, Henry, I really have a problem with your title. The title you start is the new realities of US-China relations in an interwoven world. Well, new reality, that's for sure. But interwoven world, I think, the globalization has already run its course in some ways and already reversed. And so the interwoven world that the pandemic, COVID, caused us to reminds of us of how interwoven we are, and yet right at this juncture that the world is being bifurcated, and so the new reality is not interwoven world, and the interwoven world is not the new reality. So next time, please change the topic.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we're very in a broken world probably. Well, anyway, I think we have quite a bit of discussion on that. I want to switch a bit of the subject now. And so Susan, you worked in the State Department for so many years. You are such a experienced and seasoned diplomat on Sino-US relations. So now Biden administration is already in power for over 6 months now, and now we had the Sino-US senior diplomat meet at Alaska, which is sort of surprised a lot of people. And now we recently, just about a week ago, we had the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, visited China in Tianjin. Actually, she visited Tianjin, the closest. We had other foreign ministers came, but in the other different parts of a bit further of Beijing, but the U.S. actually got the closest to the Beijing city to meet. Minister WANG met her, and also Vice Minister Xie phone met him as well. So how do you interpret the last 6 months, the new Biden administration compared with the Trump administration on the relation on China? Because you worked at, you were acting deputy assistant of the state at Trump administration for until 2018. So
until things started to get really bad, that's when I left. So I can't be held responsible for the last couple of years of the Trump administration. But yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I was saying you know both sides. But so why don't you give some analysis? Which I think we haven't got people that knows both sides to talk about that, particularly on the state level, state secretary to visit.
So I think Ronnie's very pessimistic, and is mentioning that the U.S. is chosen to fall into the Thucydides trap. I guess I hope it's not that. I don't think it's that much of a plan, and I don't think it's that purposeful. I think there's still a lot of uncertainty and chaos in the Biden administration as they sort of inherit a lot of things from the Trump administration that are still being sorted out, obviously. They're trying to focus a lot on domestic issues. Foreign policy is definitely second fiddle. I think the Biden administration is looking to not have problems on the foreign policy front. But I mean, I think it's fair to say that, first of all, moving from the Trump administration's very sort of toxic, negative narrative on China to something more constructive is not going to happen overnight, just because of the psychology of the body politic and the sort of the narratives in the media, et cetera. So looking at that problem, you could see how, it would take quite a bit of time and effort to try to strategize and figure out how to change that, without giving people whiplash. The other thing I think is that the Trump narrative on China is useful for galvanizing, to some extent, domestic political backing for certain parts of Biden's program. And it's also a defensive move. And I just published a chapter in a book. The book is called Engaging China, the last 50 years of Sino-US relations. And it involved writers and authors who were there at the beginning, at the beginning of US-China relations, and then are writing now and reflecting back on the engagement. But the chapter that I wrote with Ken Lieberthal at Brookings is about the transition between US political administrations and how US-China relations figures in that. And it's very typical in recent US administrations that presidents come in, especially if it's a change of party, and they, have been very hard on China generally during the political campaign. And they have all kinds of wild ideas about things they're going to do, this and that, with respect to US-China relations. We saw this under Reagan, believe it or not. We also saw it with Bill Clinton. We saw it with George W. Bush. Maybe not quite so much with Obama. But it is a fairly typical thing to see this kind of adjustment take place within the first year of a US administration. And so, Biden's been at this for 6 months. He's got a lot on his plate. He knows the US-China relationship very well. And I have to think, especially after seeing his meeting with Putin and the way that he has spoken determinedly about having a meeting with President Xi, that he, sees himself as a leader in this relationship and wants to drive it in a direction that's going to be better. It's going to take, I think, more time. The couple meetings that we've had so far are not enough. China is certainly venting anger at, what's transpired over the last couple of years. And I just have to say, in fact, it's not quite fair, because China did not vent anger during the Trump administration in the way that it's doing now with Biden. And it's actually the Trump administration that started all of this, and, and did it in a very kind of, sort of chaotic way. But China was, so worried about Trump's chaos, it didn't dare say anything. So it's had all of this anger sort of built up over the last several years. And now that Biden comes in, who's a more reasonable person and a more, level-headed leader, they're sort of unloading on him because they know they can, because they know it's a more familiar and reliable kind of relationship, maybe. So, we have to see that for what it is as well. I think it would be good if China could sort of just, keep it low key for a little bit longer and give some more time. And then I hope there will be a meeting of the two leaders. I know, with COVID, everything, we have to recognize too that COVID is playing a big part in this, in our poor communication, because it's very hard to meet. It was very hard to set up this meeting in Tianjin. It was very hard to set up the meeting in Anchorage. And it's very hard to get our two presidents together face to face in person in the same room right now. So I think we need to take a deep breath and maybe be a little bit more patient. I know China is not fully understanding all of the statements and things that the US is making, and I think that it's right for China to question that in private and maybe even in public, but to do it in a way that leaves open some space for us to sort of move this in a kind of a more low-key, gradual off-ramp direction.
Susan, I have a little bit slightly different take than what you have just said.
Good.
I don't think, see, your chapter with Ken, by the way, say hello to Ken. Your chapter with Ken, talks about the different administrations. But from the Chinese perspective, it's the United States of America. Whether it's this president, that president, is the United States of America. And America has been so strong that everybody has to play along with the American politics, and hence new administration, you react differently. But then from the Chinese perspective, as I see it, is that they were really bending backwards during the Trump times. It's not just because Trump was a crazy guy in US-China relations and many other things. China was really bending backwards, trying to build relationships, restore the relationship, and then they failed because Trump didn't want any part of it. And then they were hoping that Biden would be a little bit better, and Biden turned out to be no better. And as I said, some of us never believed that, Biden will turn better because the whole body politics in America has already been poisoned. But nonetheless, the Chinese thought that let's hope that Biden will turn better. Biden didn't. And as a result, the Chinese say, this is very consistent, irrespective. It doesn't matter what Susan and Ken Lieberthal have written about changing of administration. This administration is still going to go in the wrong direction as far as China is concerned. And hence, they are becoming tougher and tougher. And I agree with you, Susan. I hope that, there are two people fighting on the stage right now. In the past, there was one adult. That was China, not Trump, not the United States. But now I'm afraid that there's no adult on the stage anymore. And that's where I begin to worry. But let me also take another backward look. I think that what is changing today is a culmination of 30 years of relationship. In other words, by 1990, when the Soviet Union fell, China had June 4th the year before, and the United States begin to see China in a very, very different light. As I told Henry Kissinger, I said, what you did in 1972, in some ways is very good, but the reason behind it is basically the presence of Soviet Union. And it's not strong enough, not good enough, a reason for it to last if Soviet Union is no longer a problem. Most of us didn't see Soviet Union collapsing. And when it collapsed in the early 1990s, the rationale for having better relationship dissipated. And so many of my friends, Paul Wolfowitz, for example, began to write white paper and this and that in 1992 about, the Pacific, that's really targeting China. So that relationship has been on the wane for 30 years. And so we are really not just looking at Trump and Biden. We should look at the last 30 years where relationships are on the downswing. It wasn't, when the Korean War came, the relationship dropped off the cliff. When Nixon went to China, the relationship overnight went to heaven. But this time, from 1990 onward, roughly, the relationship been gradually trending down. And so what Trump did is just to kick it into hell, that's all. And then the whole body politics in America has been so poisoned vis-a-vis China. They say China is a threat. China is a threat to who? China is a threat not to the world. China is a threat to American supremacy, perhaps, in some areas. And so, and then as in any society, 95% of the population don't really understand these things or analyze these things. So if the president says that, hey, China is a bad guy, China is a bad guy, how many people really know enough to think through issues? And so, it's a very sad situation. I never thought that I will see the day when the U.S.-China relationship get to that bad a situation, and I don't foresee it getting better anytime soon, whether it is the Democrats or the Republicans.
Well, you mentioned the last 30 years, Ronnie. I mean, that exactly coincides with my time in the State Department, basically. I joined in 1991, the year that Soviet Union collapsed, and it went to the Soviet Union. But I agree with your fundamental observation that we really never had in the US, we would say, I don't know how the interpreter is going to translate this, but a come to Jesus moment after the collapse of the Soviet Union. With China, it was because we were still recovering from the June 4th. But I think we never had that moment inside the United States either to figure out sort of what it was now after the collapse of the Soviet Union that the US was going to be doing in the world. I mean, you say the attitude was about US supremacy, but I don't think that inside the United States, there was no debate really. There was Frank Fukuyama's book about the end of history, and sort of everyone just kind of assumed that like everything would fall into place now and just go on. And they, were preoccupied with Europe, of course, and lots of other things, the Balkans. Then we moved into the Great War on Terror. And so it's just like never really sitting down and saying, okay, what is the purpose of our place in the world now? And really it coincided also with this rapid globalization. I mean, Henry, your center is about globalization, and Ronnie doesn't think that we should have the title Globalization or Interwoven World in the talk, but I want to come back to it because really the 90s was the decade of globalization, and we probably hit peak globalization around 2008 before the financial crisis, but we never updated the institutions. We never actually sat around and fundamentally kind of thought about how globalization changes the international discourse and the way countries are going to operate together. We never really did that. And now we're kind of grown up with this international system. China says UN Charter, but the UN Charter is not enough to serve us in a globalized world. It's not enough. We have to have rules and institutions around all these other things that are trans-border phenomena and transnational phenomena, and our systems don't fit together. So how are we going to do that? We've never really had that conversation, in my view. And so now China says, well, the US made all those rules, we don't want them. And the US says, well, China's trying to dump all the rules and impose its system on everyone. And so that's not a productive way of looking at the situation, actually, when you can see, looking back, how we got to here.
Yeah. I'm fully with you, Susan, on that one. I think, on the side of, that you and I have probably in the camp of, and that is, wanting the world to be a more peaceful one and US-China relationship develop in a better way. We really did not come up with a, whatever moment you call it, we did not really have an intellectual discussion that is nationwide in the United States. Why we are doing why did we do this, such as Nixon visit to China, and now what's next? There's really not an intellectual discussion along that line. And then at the same time, you have people such as Donald Rumsfeld, such as Paul Wolfowitz, such as the vice president under whatever. Cheney. Anyway, Cheney, they begin to, the neocons begin to, move briskly during that time. And I think that the globalization of the world after the fall of the Soviet Union blunted their advance somewhat. But then eventually they took the center stage. And today, whether it's Trump and even Biden, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I would never imagine Biden taking the position that it does today vis-a-vis China. And so you can that tells you how that the whole political apparatus in America and then with the media really influencing the society has moved it in the wrong direction. And it's an aircraft carrier. Aircraft carrier cannot turn easily. And that's what I'm afraid that we are looking at.
Yeah. No, I think both of you have actually give a very good, analysis of the situation. I think that this year actually marked 50 years of Dr. Kissinger's secret visit to China. We just had the webinar with him just about 20 days ago that celebrated his historical visit. And also, it's 20 years of China joining WTO and 30 years of ending the Cold War. That's where Susan started your diplomatic at the State Department diplomatic career. Very glorious. What I would like to say actually further, maybe put a little detail, because we had Deputy Secretary of State Ms. Sherman's visit to Tianjin, and then in that meeting, I think it's better than Alaska. Probably both sides now come up with some concrete list now. At least to say we have to, work down and see how we can resolve those differences, and of course also that the Chinese has proposed that there's some ideas how we can really shut down, maybe some list of the controversy or things that the China don't want. But on the other hand, also the U.S. has proposed a list too. But ultimately we hope that maybe, as Susan you said, maybe it's this COVID-19 is not really helping. We need more frequency of the higher senior diplomatic visit, but also probably even top heads of the state visit, a meeting at the G20 if possible. But right after the meeting of Tianjin, Foreign Minister Qin Gang actually went to the United States and already arrived in Washington. So we hope that we can start a new, some concrete discussion on that. I noticed actually, yesterday, Steve Orlins, from National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, he wrote a piece at the South China Morning Post titled, "How the U.S. Can Craft a Bold and Positive China Agenda That Benefits All Americans." Basically, his op-ed, he said, let's revoke tariffs, let's revisit the curbs on the Chinese people, Chinese companies, and the media, engage constructively on human rights and international norms, fine-tune Taiwan policy, and ditch confrontation. The U.S. should not understate the benefit of constructive engagement brought to the American people. So it seems a very good op-ed, and he made a lot of recommendations. Relax the visas, relax student visit, and then maybe we should not confrontation so much. So Susan, what do you think? Maybe we follow a bit more concrete and things like we can revoke, like tariff and things like that. So maybe you could give some more insights on that, Susan, please.
Yeah, I mean, I am hopeful that, I wasn't so happy that frankly, that the notion of giving the U.S. a list of demands was publicized, because I think that makes it then, politically harder in the U.S. to do those things, not easier. It's good to keep, in U.S.-China relations, it's good to keep some of those detailed issues for the closed door meeting. But so I hope that won't, it won't entrench the two sides demanding that the other side make the first move. I'm afraid that might be where we are now. And I do worry about that. We need somebody to do something that's a little bit, bold and shows leadership to try to get this thing unstuck. But I'm hopeful that these kind of, lists of issues, and certainly Wendy Sherman's meeting, both sides mentioned these areas for potential cooperation. Climate change has, of course, been one that has been mentioned frequently. I personally want us to work together on the pandemic, and I think it's going to be very hard, but I'm going to keep pushing it because it's inexcusable and will be a historical shame if we don't do it. And, there are other issues, Afghanistan, North Korea, Myanmar, I think were mentioned. So there are a number of areas where we can, find ways, hopefully, to cooperate. We're doing, joint negotiations still, I hope, with Iran, and I hope that it becomes more fruitful in the future than it's indicating right now. But we have to do these things together, and I hope we can sort of work toward something pragmatic like that after these meetings. But there's still there's a lot of politics swirling around in Washington, as Ronnie has pointed out, and frankly, there's a lot of things happening also in Beijing, and the domestic politics are really creating a lot of problems for both sides right now. And I think we do need to see some bold leadership in both capitals to try to get through this impasse. Maybe a little bit less worrying about, protecting your flank from this or that. I don't know how realistic that is. Maybe Ronnie has a view on that for how realistic it is in Beijing. You know, it is difficult in Washington right now too. Biden's trying to get big spending bills through, and it's a difficult political environment for him. But you know, I do think he wants to get the relationship with China in a better place. And so you know, just knowing him and knowing his experience with China, even though he sounds tough and he is tough, I think he's worried. Frankly, the biggest worry, and Ronnie, you talked about, you know, who's threatening who and who's doing what to whom. And I mean, I think in the region, China's military buildup is causing concern, and that causes demand signals for US involvement. And the US is feeling after Trump a kind of over exaggerated need to reassure people in the region that the US is going to be there, and you know, in the face of their insecurity coming from China's military buildup. But the real problem is the economy. The Americans, and Joe Biden also feels this, that you know, it's really not clear the future shape of the international economy and the place of the US and China in it is very cloudy right now, I think. And international businesses are feeling this. I think developed countries in general who rely on sort of innovation and technology to be their engines of growth are feeling this. And it's causing a lot of anxiety. And I think that the sort of feeling that there's an economic threat coming from China, and we can't make China understand why we feel this way is a real problem. So maybe I'll just stop there and see if you all have a reaction to that.
Well,
yeah,
so
maybe I just Ronnie, yes, please.
Many years ago, I have a dear friend, a couple, and one party later I found out already wanted to divorce, and she didn't let it out, didn't let people know. But once in a great while, I got an inkling that, man, maybe she doesn't want this relationship to continue. And so she play along, and they were together. They go out to dinner. They take care of their family, their children or whatever. But in her heart, she was divorced already. And that's what I'm afraid is happening today. That the United States the body politic has decided that U.S.-China relationship is going to be a threat to vital American interests. And so we're going to have give them hell. We're going to divorce. But then on the surface, you cannot say it too loudly. So the Chinese were trying their best to keep a good relationship throughout the Trump eras, and then into the Biden. There was an opportunity to reset. But when they saw what happened in Hawaii, they met with Pompeo, right? And didn't go too well. And then the Chinese went to American soil twice. That shows you how desperate the Chinese are to want to get the relationship better. I'm sure Biden insisted that it has to be an American soil. So, okay, fine. The farthest place, first one is Hawaii under Trump. Now it's Alaska under Biden. So that, and as you know, in diplomacy, these kind of things matters, where you meet and who speaks first and this and that. And the Chinese are bending backwards to go over to American soil twice. And the Chinese in particular, perhaps, is a little bit even more sensitive than most people on these kind of protocol issues. And yet what they got was a Blinken that is almost as bad as a Pompeo as far as the Chinese are concerned. And that's why, they reacted, Yang Jiechi and Wang Yi. And so that really tells you that China wanted to have a better relationship. And that was perhaps the last straw that broke the camel's back, that Biden doesn't want it either. It's not going to change. And so the Chinese begin to react. And that reaction, and you say China military buildup, all the buildup is it's a reaction to what the United States have been doing. Stop streaming down the middle of the Taiwan Strait. Stop spying in the coastal regions and see if the Chinese will build up. If they had done that in the past, they probably would not have built up as much. And when you have a big country, which is the second largest economy in the world, you know the movie Captain Phillips with Tom Hanks. that was American, big ship that was hijacked by the Somalian pirates. Well, my question is, next time when the Chinese, they need energy from the Middle East, as we all know. Next time is not Captain Phillips. Next time is Captain Henry Wang. Then what happened? Do they call the Seventh Fleet? The Seventh Fleet was the one that sent the aircraft carrier to Taiwan Strait in 1990, outside of Taiwan Strait in 1996, and then in subsequent years, for the last 2.5 decades, increasing military presence by the United States in the neighborhood. Of course, America has a good excuse. Hey, it's for our allies. Well, China has not done anything to any of America's allies in Asia for how long? Even Taiwan, which, as far as I'm concerned, is part of China. Just read history. Even with Taiwan, China haven't. Beijing has never had a problem since 1957 or 58 or something like that. And then America became very provocative, and then China has no choice but to react. So don't say the Chinese are, military buildup is very dangerous. And the same thing with South China Sea. I won't go into all that stuff. But anyway, I think that we are already way beyond that point. I think the United States is like that lady friend of mine from decades ago who wanted the divorce. It's just, you cannot say it out loud yet for whatever reason, the children's education or whatever, this and that. But on the other hand, I think it's really, really bad news as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know, but I think we are the U.S.-China relations certainly goes through an agonizing process. But we hope that it will be really, getting better maybe in the longer run. Because I recently we had a CCG has conducted a number of dialogues. We talked to the Graham Allison, Joseph Nye, Martin Wolf, Thomas Friedman, all of them. And also 2 days ago, 1 day ago, we talked with John Thornton and quite a few others. Well, I think they don't disagree that we shouldn't have a great Cold War. I mean, U.S. and China, there was an adjustment period. I mean, Joseph and I said maybe by 2035, when we look back, we probably can maybe repair the relation and then maybe get back to some kind of normalcy. We need a little bit longer horizon to look at that. So Susan, I know that you worked in the Consulate General in Chengdu. It's unfortunate we shut that down. I mean, and then U.S. shut down the Houston. I mean, I
think Henry's frozen, but I
get some positive news. Yeah, so maybe you could give some further advice on that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, I've heard quite a few people say that it's going to take quite a long time to, you're still hearing me? Okay. Take quite a long time for U.S.-China relations to shake out this time, that we're going to go through a cycle of maybe, 10 years of a downturn. But I really think that we cannot afford to have that happen, because what's going to happen if we have this divorce that Ronnie's talking about, or even a divorce without the formality of divorce, but just basically a bifurcation or a separation. I mean, it's gonna impact the international system, and we've got globalization now, so we need an international system. And it's so I'm not really convinced that we're going to be able to get along in the sort of globalized. I mean, we've passed peak globalization. I agree with Ronnie about that, but there are certain elements of globalization that are not going to turn back, and those still need to be governed by some kind of international discourse and system that goes beyond just the UN Charter. And I mean, look at all these transnational law enforcement cases. I mean, these are extremely difficult for governments to work on together, particularly the US and Chinese governments. They've always been difficult, but they're impossible right now. I mean, we're just going to let these transnational criminals run rampant because the US and China can't talk to each other. We need to have some kind of institutions that, can generate consensus among countries, and where we can sort of try to fit our systems together. And the thing I have to say about, China always standing on sovereignty and talking about how, interference in internal affairs is prohibited by the UN Charter. I mean, this, is a real problem in our relationship, and I think we have to have an honest conversation about it. I mean, all countries interfere in other countries' internal affairs. We have embassies in those, countries, and they're always doing this kind of stuff, monitoring what's going on there, lobbying the governments. I mean, that, we're trying to influence each other constantly. And in a globalized world, this is just going to be a fact of life. And so we've got to figure out what is the real problem here. What are the rules by which we can sort of regulate this? And how can we fit our systems together more seamlessly on both the economic front, because we absolutely need to do that. The first and second largest economies in the world, and we're not going to have trade. I don't believe it. So, that's going to have to be worked out. But also all these other areas where we have overlapping and transnational boundary issues, migration, crime, cyber, space, all of these other areas, pandemics, health, transportation, which, mobility, people movement back and forth. This isn't going to stop just because the US and China aren't getting along. I mean, even during the Soviet Union, when we had a very major estrangement between the US and the Soviet Union, we still had people flows and some trade back and forth. So, and I want to just repeat again that China is not the Soviet Union, and it should not try to be the Soviet Union. That would be a huge mistake for both China, but also for the world, I think, and certainly it wouldn't be good for US-China relations. So I wonder, Ronnie, if you have a comment on that.
Well, Susan, let me try to be a trumpet for a second. China is worse than the Soviet Union. Soviet Union was only a military threat. It was an economic competitor. Whereas today, China is an economic competitor, but America wants to turn it into a military threat as well. And so it is a very sad situation that partly because of America's concoction, China is today a comprehensive competitor or even enemy of the United States, which is very sad. If you want an enemy in the international community, you can have one very easily. And that's exactly what Trump has done. And in fact, that's what Paul Wolfowitz and Dick Cheney and all those guys 30 years ago already started. So, I told a CCG meeting a couple of months ago that I lost $100 to a bet to Graham Allison. I'm trying to make it back from you, Susan. I'll be happy to bet you that in the next 10 years, your China relationship, I'm going to buy Graham Allison a good meal. But anyway, and you buy me a good meal if I win. I think the next 10 years, I wish your China relationship can get on its own feet. I agree with you fully that the international system cannot afford to have the two of the biggest economies fight like that. And so, but you talk about cyber and this and that. But what I really worry about, Susan, is the following: that the United States, not being smart in, sorry, you're a diplomat, not being smart in diplomacy over the last 30, 40 years, it's going to force itself back to some form of isolationism. After all, America was founded in isolationism and not in internationalism. And, for example, the role that America played in the post-World War II era did the world a hell of good. But on the other hand, once the Soviet fell, all the restraints is now gone. America, U.S. Congressional Research did a study that whereas roughly before the fall of the Soviet Union, America had 1.1 military action every year for the previous 170 years or whatever. And then after that, it's 6.1 times per year. So I think that, talking about interfering in other countries, no country has the ability to interfere like the United States did. And when you're as powerful as the United States, the way you interfere is a lot more. I mean, consider the fact that, hey, some friend of mine want to have a conference in Japan, some Japanese, to study whether America is a reliable partner. I said, no need to have such a time. Just call Merkel or Macron, and the phones were tapped. right? So, talking about interfering in other people, other countries. And when you have power and don't use it, is really takes a lot of self-enlightenment to do that. And I worry that America has not been doing it for the last 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union, and afterwards even worse because there's no more restraint. And so America is forcing itself back into isolationism in some way. You cannot desegregate the world totally in economics and so forth. But as a leader of the world, China was hoping for a long time that the United States will still be the leader of the world. China, as I have publicly stated many times, 10, 20 years ago, China is very happy to play second fiddle to the United States. But the United States feels threatened by the number 2 guy, that he's going to replace me as the concert master. So what can you do? And China is economically rising, and then America is boxing China in from Japan on the east, India on the southwest, and whoever in the west, and so forth, Vietnam in the south. And so if you are put yourself in the Chinese shoes, and you feel boxed in by the number 1 country in the world, and so you have to survive. Unless you say, okay, fine, I'll be just like small countries, very, very small countries, and bow to the United States. There's no way. China is 1.3 billion people, 1.4. And so I think the United States is feeling very threatened, which is unnecessary. And so once I discovered the losing of self-confidence on the part of the United States, 20 years ago, I said, this is really bad news. America should not lose self-confidence, and America should be able to work well with China. And I think on China's side, China can still work to be the second fiddle to the United States, but it's going to be a lot tougher after the last couple of years of Trump and now Biden. But I think it's still doable.
Yeah, so what are we betting on? I didn't get what we're betting on. You say 10 years is not going to be good, and I say 10 years we will recover. Is that it?
Yeah.
So I have to find you look you up in 10 years, and you can take me to dinner, or
I think you will take me to dinner, Susan.
Okay. I'll be
happy
to.
I'll bring good wine.
No, I think actually, it's fascinating discussion, both Susan and Ronnie. And what I think, both of you are really pointing out something very significant, that of course, the post-Second World War, the US-led global governance system actually, pushed the world into prosperity, and, we have avoided the major catastrophe of Third World War. Of course, we cannot now seems like working together on this pandemic war, but absolutely the system probably needs upgrade, needs enrichment, needs enhancement, where I think China can probably help on that as well. I just read something that Susan just probably mentioned before in the written that, and you wrote that the only realistic path forward for the United States and China is to co-evolve through cooperation and competition into adjusted and sustainable order, which is well said. And also, you said China active participation in international structure is now crucial to the development of the rest of the world. Its contribution will be key to making progress to the greatest challenges we face, which will continue to be transnational in nature. US-China co-evolution in a globalized international system is the only realistic and productive path forward. So I think you said very well. Now it seems now we have a lot of slowdown on the global level, like WTO, like other international system. But then we have the regional, actually getting together now, and then RCEP, China first with ASEAN, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and then CPTPP, of course, led by Japan and Australia, but used to be designed by the US. So Susan, do you think that on this global governance system, how can we really push forward? I mean, like in a more, like say globalization point 2 or globalization point 3, that whereas US, probably China also, that we can really work out together with EU, with other major economy, and maybe G10 should have including China, Russia, India, have a climate summit or pandemic summit, and G20 should play more role, and how the UN can be more enhanced as well. And China is already the second largest donor to the UN, and then largest in the peacekeeping force of the security members, Security Council members. So what do you think about that, and how we can improve the global governance? I mean, in light of this new adjustment we probably facing right now. Susan, please.
Yeah, so Henry, you've been present, I think, for some of the discussions we've had in this forum that was started on the back of the Global Solutions Summit around the G20, which is called, for lack of a better title, which is not a perfect title, but it's called the China-West Dialogue. And it's really more about how to make sure that China is included in all of these global conversations. Because what I see and what I worry about is China kind of also sort of leaning out of the international system and starting a parallel track on its own, where it's trying to sort of, it's frustrated in the international system. It's not able to get its voice heard. It's not participating as robustly as other countries, and probably the Europeans are the most robust participators in the international system because they're the real rule drivers, I think, in the system, more than the US or China, actually. But we need China to be in the conversation and be participating actively and driving in this sort of consensus building way. And I think there's been a feeling, at least among people that participate in those meetings, that they don't have enough Chinese participation always, that China is a bit reticent still on the global stage to step up and contribute. I've seen a big change over the last 20 years, certainly in this space, but I think more is needed. I think the G20 is a very important platform. It was created after, well, it's been around for a while, but it really got going after the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And, it is it's a big organization, 20 countries is a lot, but it is a good flexible format where you can get, different combinations of these countries. You can have guests, but it's not as huge as the UN with 190 something countries, which becomes a little bit unwieldy. So I think one question is sort of how to make these institutions that we have more action oriented and more specific and more productive. I mean, some of the annual meetings and fora that we have are more for sort of galvanizing conversation and generating consensus, but they move slowly. But we need an organization that can move a little bit more quickly. And I think the G20 can be that if it has a little bit more structure and a little bit more directionality and a little bit more support. It hasn't gotten a lot of support, I don't think, from all the countries involved all the time. And I hope it can become a more kind of leading organization. Of course, we've got the OECD on the economic front. We've got the World Bank and the IMF will continue to be important. We've got various development organizations, the development banks, et cetera. So there are just a lot of organizations at this point. And I think trying to get them to cohere, you really need the leadership driving it that comes from like a leaders meeting at the G20, something like that. I'm all for regional trade agreements, but frankly, the global trading system is a global system and the WTO has to serve. And, every country is in there that is a member of this global trading system, and, generating consensus there and reforms is difficult, but that system has got to work, and China's got to help us get that system to work, frankly. And, a big part of this is going to be how can we fit, China's unique sort of economic model together with the economic models of others, and what kind of changes can be made on both sides to make it fair and make countries feel like they are able to compete and participate, on a level playing field in that arena. And I think we have a lot of work to do there.
Yeah, thank you. I think WTO is really also important, and we hope that we can get along that. I mean, Ronnie, your comment on that?
Well, I agree with Susan that G20 should be a very, very good venue for a lot of issues in the world. But China, as a new player to it, has to feel that it is not totally American-driven and dominated. And consider, a couple of years ago, I think it must be under Obama during the G7 days, which is really not representative enough. But anyway, they invited Russia. You remember there was a year or two that Russia was invited. And I thought to myself, what a joke. That's a joke. Sorry, Russia is a lovely country. The music and the literature is beautiful, but economically is not a player in the global scene except in energy. And so, and you didn't invite China, you invited Russia. And it's obviously a message to the Chinese that you are out, we don't like you. It's not, communication is not what you say, it's what the other person hear. Moreover, I believe in this case, it was a deliberate message. And so the Chinese have been watching this thing for the last 20, 30 years. As China economically rise, they see that, the West is increasingly boxing it in. I don't like the title China and the West, but anyway, it puts in an adversarial position. And then you have pivot to Asia, under the Obama days. Who are you targeting? Oh, we're not targeting anybody. Come on, none of us are kids, okay? And so all these things are really forcing China to rethink its position in the world. And China has been thinking about this. G7, how long ago that was? That was a long time ago. Pivot to Asia, that was Obama days. And then, of course, now Indo-Pacific, that's another subject. But anyway, understandably so from an American perspective, it is really part of the encirclement of China. So if you are China, you are living in a very uncomfortable world. I don't think China will form a parallel international system. I don't think China is strong enough or have the desire to do that. Chinese don't speak English, by the way. And if you don't speak English well, you don't lead the world today. And China will not do that. But if America is retreating from global leadership, then what will happen? We are looking at a fragmented world that is going to be no leader. A lot of Americans assume that China will take the leadership if America were to retreat. I don't think so. And by the way, if China is smart, it should not do that. It doesn't have the wherewithal to do it, very expensive. And so, don't even attempt, just be a responsible player in the international scene. But of course, to be responsible is by whose rule. And so the Chinese say, it's all Western rule so far, which is, you can't change that. And China was happy to accept it as long as you don't box China in as the West, in particular, the United States, has been, together with a few small countries, like Australia and Japan, and India is not that small in population. But anyway, so the world is in a very, very bad situation, and I believe that it really began when America lost self-confidence and decided that China is a threat to its own vital interests. I say again, China is not a threat, in my opinion, to American vital interests. It's a threat to American leadership, sole leadership, perhaps. And China is very happy to work with America as a co-equal, protocol-wise, but privately, second fiddle. I think China was happy to play, and I hope that China will be able to be convinced to still work with the United States when the other side really don't want to work with you.
Yeah, no, I think that China has actually, the government has said many times that China doesn't want to replace the US. China wants to be really working with US on those international governance issues, because there's no intention from China to replace US, or US shouldn't worry about that. So maybe one final question from me is that what we work together, because we have we had John Kerry come to Shanghai in March, and and also President Xi attended President Biden's Earth Day Summit on climate change. So that is actually a good sign that we have many things to work on. I mean, just now Susan mentioned the issues like North Korea, Iran, Myanmar, and now even Afghanistan now become a vacuum. So many issues we could. Pandemic is probably the most urgent one as well. But they actually just at our conference, the 7th annual CCG annual conference, we had a former Vice Minister Chen Jian of Commerce actually said, at the conference that maybe we could work with to get U.S. on those infrastructure project. I noticed that Biden has already reached a consensus with probably both bipartisan on investing U.S. pseudo infrastructure, because I think U.S. and not only U.S. but also the rest of the world all need infrastructure. The infrastructure could be the next biggest impetus and the drive for the global economy and globalization as well. So in that area, can we work together, like Vice Minister Chen said, maybe the B3W or Blue Dot and of the U.S. proposed G7 proposal, China can work with that with BI or EU's Euro-Asia connectivity portal. So if we all think about global infrastructure and maybe we have something big to work on in the future to glue every country's onto the new global system. Even we can upgrade AIB to GIB probably with U.S. participation, a global infrastructure investment bank. And I think that is something we need to really work into the common objective. So on the things that we can work together, maybe Susan, what's your take in this respect?
Yeah, I really hope so. I mean, I think that would be a very logical place for us to pool our efforts. And in fact, we've had these kinds of joint projects in the past. I remember Smart Cities was an area where the US and China worked very closely together, and we had local officials from states and provinces in China together trying to learn from each other about how to use technology to better manage and serve populations in cities. And I think that could be continue to be very important. Energy, technology cooperation and deployment has been a huge area of joint cooperation between the US and China in the past. We've unfortunately come to this kind of competition over infrastructure and who's going to get influence in another country by building a project. I don't think that it should be that kind of a competition. I know under the Obama administration, there was an effort to sort of work, in Africa together. China had a lot of projects in Africa, and we were doing a lot of power projects in Africa. We were trying to figure out how to make them work together. I mean, I do think it is hard for us to work together because we have a different way of doing things, certainly in infrastructure projects, there are cultural and other, just sort of commercial differences. But I think, these are areas that are in sort of, it's not as clear-cut a case as a pandemic, which is a public health emergency, but it should be pretty easy and apolitical to work on sort of development projects in third countries, in my opinion. If you can figure out how the comparative advantages line up, then you can do it. But we need the political will, which isn't there right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the US has been running World Bank for many years now. China has an AIB. I mean, all those development banks probably can work together. Actually, John Thornton just said, our webinar that at one time, actually, China and US were talking about collaborating on BI, and John Kerry told me at the Munich Security Conference last year as same thing. So there's a possibility, if we can work on climate, and also China already quite advanced on that. In terms of clean vehicles and the solar energy and the wind power and things like that, we could work with US on infrastructure. I mean, US has a lot of advantage, and I think we can work on other countries. Whereas President Xi just had a video conference with President Macron and Angela Merkel talking about working in Africa. We should get US working on that together. So we have something common to work together rather than with dividing us. Maybe Ronnie,
one of the things I worry about is that the focus on COVID-19 is now taking it's taking up a lot of oxygen that should be being devoted to climate change. And that could be the next tragedy of the commons that we all face. We can't it's very hard to do two big things like that at once. So this is why I say co-evolution is the only way, and with the pandemic, even more so now.
Absolutely, I agree. I think that we need to have this plan in the future. We have something at least to hope for, that we're not thinking about Hijiji's trap all the time. So we can really think about those good things that we can work together. Absolutely, those are really climate change and infrastructure, and particularly pandemic fighting is the most urgent thing we need to work together. Ronnie, your thought on that?
Well, I think that anything that is too involved in politics, international policy, will be very difficult. I think pandemic is really where we should all begin. And then the environment, the climate. By the way, Susan, climate is the number 2 in my list of 8 terrible things that can happen to mankind. And I think that, in these issues, if please convince the White House and the State Department not to be too politically driven and just solve issues, practical problems, I think the world will be a much better place. There are many other issues out there, like international standards and all that stuff. It's really a lot of problems that only the 2 biggest countries work together can be solved. And but given today's political environment, I'm really, really saddened by the situation. But I hope that with John Kerry's effort, on the climate, because let's face it, the Democrats are far more willing to work on this subject than the Republicans. But that said, I think America overall is behind. I couldn't believe how many Americans do not believe in climate change. And so somehow America in this regard has to step up as well. China knows that their fast development of the last 30 years is really damaging their own environment terribly. And of course, that would damage other people's environment as well, because we all share the same global village. And so the Chinese are really, really serious about dealing with the environment. So I think that's one area that if the United States show a stronger interest, the 2 parties may be able to work together. And we need to, and also, America is now ganging up with bringing friends to encircle China. You don't let those kind of things. Those things, frankly, in my opinion, is not useful. I mean, how much can Australia help, or even India or Japan? But optically, it's really, really very damaging to the Beijing leaders. And if you don't let those things go, I think that cooperation will be limited. Yeah.
Well, I think that we had a very, very good discussion actually so far. And I think that the US and China should really working. But one of the urgent things about pandemic is about this virus vaccine recognition, because we had people cannot travel because of different countries didn't recognize vaccine China produced or US pharmaceutical company produced. The mobility of the issue of the if we're going to coexist with virus for a long time to come, how we can really start this reboot world, the international travel, but at the same time maintain the content in the virus. That's really a big issue. I mean, for many countries, student cannot come, even like a Schwarzman College for the whole year. The student can come to China, not studying, graduated already, not attending one day at the campus. So and also Chinese student can't go to the United States and things like that. So I think there's a lot of issues that we can work on the international travel, but probably recognize the vaccine of those countries that are recognized by WHO, and so those are really great. Actually, my staff was telling me we had about almost 400,000 people viewing us online, and we almost come to the conclusion of our webinar. But we have received a few questions from online media as well. So I just pass those questions, and we have a final round, and maybe also have some concluding remarks as well. I have a question from China Daily, which ask that the U.S. administration made the rounds of pushing lab leaking hypotheses while turning deaf to while not really responding to the 4 Detroit probe requests. So what's your view on that? There was another news from Guancha News, which is based in Shanghai. The United States used its economic and financial power to dominate the global economic order and used the sanctions against many countries and enterprises. At present, the United States still imposing sanctions on some officials in Iran, Huawei, and even Hong Kong, China. Many enterprises have to comply with the US decrees of cutting off exchanges with relevant entities. However, since last year, China taken a serious countermeasures and formulated laws and regulations, such as anti-foreign sanction law of People's Republic of China, measures for blocking improper extraterritorial application of foreign laws and measures, provision on a list of unreliable entities. So today, there may be direct conflicts between the laws and regulations of China and those of the United States in some field, and it seems to be very difficult to abide by the laws of both sides at the same time. What should enterprises do? Can WTO and other multilateral mechanisms play a role in such situation? There's another question from Beijing News. The eve of Chinese Lunar New Year, President Xi Jinping had a phone conversation with the US President Biden. Then the US-China held high levels in Alaska and recently in Tianjin. So we probably cover some of that. How would you comment on the exchanges between China and the United States and your prediction for the future? What are the prospects for cooperation between China and the United States? So I think we have those are questions posed online, but we love to hear your feedback, but also your final conclusion and remarks for our webinar, which this is our second special feature webinar of the 7th Center for China Globalization Forum.
Well, I'll just start and be real quick, because I think we did address some of those issues during our earlier rounds, but on the issue of the pandemic, I mean, I think that I've been pretty clear and pretty strong in my clarion call for better cooperation between the US and China to face the ongoing pandemic and mitigate the damage in our own countries, but also to help other governments really face up to the problems that they have and get vaccines out throughout the world. I mean, nobody's going to be safe in either one of our countries until not just our people get vaccinated, but everybody gets vaccinated. And we can't keep our countries shut down. As Henry, you were just saying, we have to restore mobility. So in order to do that, we've got to get everyone vaccinated. And we'll probably need booster shots every year. So there's going to be a lot of vaccine production, and we should be focused on cooperating how to get that done. On the question about what should enterprises do, I mean, this gets to the issue of how we need rules in the international system to govern this commercial space that is come about under globalization and is a fantastic thing for promoting global prosperity. We need to repair the WTO. We need to get together and agree on rules of how our systems are going to fit together, which countries' courts should be able to decide disputes, or how dispute resolution is going to work in all these cases. We can't keep having these anti-suit injunctions, and then you have an anti-suit injunction and competing court processes. I mean, this is not the way we should be moving. And I think it is really difficult for companies right now. It's going to continue to be difficult until we can get some repair work done on this relationship. The last thing on the exchanges at the official level between the US and China, we've talked a little bit about that. What I want to say is that, you know, the relations between our governments are not always going to be very good. And in recent years, of course, they've not been good at all. But it doesn't mean that the relationship on the non-governmental level has to be hostage to that official relationship. There's a lot that goes on day to day between the United States and China, in business, in culture, in academics and education, in exchanges, and all kinds of other areas that need to continue, that need to be expanded. And I really hope, Henry, that your Globalization Center can have some kind of a youth summit so we can get younger voices in on this conversation, because those are the people that are going to be affected by this relationship that Ronnie predicts is going to be bad for the next 10 years. I mean, this is the lives of young people in both our countries. It's a significant portion of the global population, and they should be in on the conversation to try to, understand what's happening and so that we can hear their voices on how they think about it too.
Thank
I'm
you,
with
Susan.
you, Susan, that we have to have a rule-based society. But when you have one country who is so big that it can write its own laws, such as I sanction you, is that rule-based? I don't know. And then I really worry about this thing, about the sanctioning of businesses and this and that, and the counter sanctioning, as you rightly pointed out. And so, yeah, let's have a rule-based society. The only way to go, but not when one country is so big that it can totally, frankly, reject the rules and yet still give the perception that I am the rule, I am righteousness. You guys break the law, I don't, but the reality is, check history. America probably broke more law or international rules than any other country. So I think that it comes back to a very fundamental point. I'll end there. And that is, the world for the last 200 years has seen Asian waning, and it has seen the West rising. So and then after World War II, the United States became the undisputed leader of the world. And it's done a lot of good, as I've said. But on the other hand, although it has done a lot of good, if one is not self-enlightened and to not keep our own superiority complex, that a big country like China cannot economically rise. And if it rises, it would disrupt the international system. Well, it's your interest in the international system that you led the world to form for good in the past. But the world has changed. You cannot deny the fact that 1.4 billion people has gone, from a 1,000 per capita US dollar per capita income to now a 10,000. And so the world has changed. And so the West has to gradually adjust to a world which is a fairer world, a world where there are other people, sorry to bring this word in, who is of the different race that is rising. And Japan rising was a shock to America 40, 50 years ago, but they were small. There was only 120 million people, less than that in those days. But China is big, is 10 times bigger in size and more. And so I think the West to adjust intellectually, culturally, mentally to a different world. If not, then I do worry that I think 10 years are a little bit too short to expect any positive change, Susan. But in line with what you said about having a non-government, since now you're out of government and I'm never in government, I will still buy you dinner and bring the wine. And then you bring your friends from Yale and I bring my friend from wherever, from Hong Kong,
Okay.
and we will have a nice discussion together.
It's a deal.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think, yeah, we had a very fruitful and stimulating and productive discussion and dialogue this morning and also this evening. That's exactly CCG would like to do, is to promote the dialogues and understanding, and also to really explain the points on both sides. And I think this is really also the meaning of our annual conference as well. We had so many lively discussions on that as well. So I really appreciate that. We also have a large online audience participate this morning, and also some media. But I think that the point is really well taken, that I think China and the US, in the 21st century, situation has been changed. The diameter has been changed, that we have to work together, for the sake of the humanity. And also we have the moral responsibility. I think US being the largest economy, China being the second largest, we have the moral responsibility to the 7.5 billion people, not just between China and US. And I think in that respect, I think that we need really intensify our communication, our dialogue, and high-level visit, student exchanges, tourism, and scenes, believing, and also culture and media, and resume our consulate and things like that. So I really think those are good things we all talked about. And I really appreciate both of your time, and particularly Susan, you joined us late in the evening now, and really very thankful. And also, we're going to continue our webinar Tomorrow, we're going to have another webinar with Pascal Ami, the former WTO Director General, also Wendy Cutler, the acting USTR in the Obama administration. So I want to thank both of you very much. Susan Saunton, the senior fellow at the Yale Center of Power Charge Center at Yale University, and also Ronnie Chan. He's the chair of Han Long Property in Hong Kong, but also a position of many important organizations. So once again, thank you, and thank our audience. Thank you, all the viewers, and appreciate all your participation. Thank you very much. We hope to see you again.
Thank you.
And also enjoy the dinner too. Okay,
yes, enjoy the dinner. Bye.
Yeah.
Good to see you, Ronnie. Bye.
Good seeing you, Susan.
Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye. 差不多，我觉得我